party is very democratic, and our party has always a vigorous debate within it. But this campaign really is about talking to Ontarians and getting their feedback and giving them a chance, frankly, to make a decision about their future.
Well, that was the leader of the NDP in Ontario, Andrea Horwath, again today trying to bat away questions about her policies that are coming not from her opponents, not from the media, but from inside her own party. This in the midst of an election campaign. How damaging is this stuff? The insiders have seen this movie before and can give us their take. Kathleen's in Ottawa tonight. David is here in Toronto. And with Jamie off tonight, Bill Fox joins us once again. So Kathleen, you start us. How, you know, we have seen this kind of movie before many times in other areas, other arenas, other campaigns.
Certainly, in over many years, yeah.
But how damaging is it when it happens?
Well, listen, it's never good to either have or have the perception of fractures in your party, especially not during an election campaign. In 5 to 6 week election campaign, you can't afford to have these kind of negative headlines because you're wasting money and it's getting you off your narrative. That said, I think every party has these problems. We saw it with Christy Clark in the election in 2013. We've seen it before in the Liberal Party, the Federal Liberal Party. The key is that you have to deal with situations like this is you have to remember that real political insiders wouldn't have these public battles during an election campaign. People who are engaged and truly involved with the party have these fights on floors of convention in the various policy plenaries, or they have these fights at morning senior campaign team meetings that happen at 6 a.m. every day in the campaign room, in the war room. So I think Andrea has dealt with this well. She's basically dealt with it head on and is moving on back onto her narrative, which is what she needs to do.
Well, she may be dealing with it well in your view. I'm not surprised you would say that, but it's still there after almost a week of this. David, does it work as a rallying the troops mechanism, or is it more a destroying the morale of troops?
I think internecine warfare, friendly fire, is among the most dangerous things that can happen. I was in charge of a campaign federally in 2006 that suffered from that. I think it cost us the election in part. Our platform was leaked internally, various other things happened like that, and it really sets you back. And, you know, I think one of the best examples of this is, the impact of this is the 1988 election, where out of the blue, John Turner wins the debate in 1988 and looks like he might become the Prime Minister. One of the ways that the Mulroney Conservatives fought back was by using all of the fighting that had gone on in the Liberal Party and the undercutting of Mr. Turner against him publicly. And I think the line was, he's not fighting for your job, he's fighting for his own job. And that's pretty deadly, because internal party fights, people don't question the motivation. They assume they're all liberals. So they assume the attacks have more validity than they do when they're coming from political opponents who you can dismiss. The
interesting thing about that Turner example is that at the beginning of the campaign, it was a disaster for him. His own party, key people, tried to get him to resign.
Right.
It was the debate that saved him.
Right.
It turned things around and caused you, Bill Fox, all kinds of nightmares.
Well, but I remember a certain chief correspondent playing a pretty prominent role in that John Turner for the Door story. I agree with Kathleen that they're hugely problematic, and they're in particular for two groups. The first is the actual campaign team. I think it's hugely demoralizing for people who are working literally night and day in committee rooms right across the province or the country, depending on the jurisdiction. You know, manning phone banks, raising money, working social media, going door to door. To have, you know, party grandees some distance removed sort of sniping. I think that's hugely problematic. The other group I think you need to connect with right away are candidates, for two reasons. One, they need to have something to say at the door when people raise it with them. They need a very crisp response as to what's going on, and then they need a transition to get the conversation back to the one they want to have. So they need to get it very quickly back to what they think the ballot question needs to be. And the other reason I think you need to connect with candidates right away is as a feedback loop. I think you need to come to an assessment to, you know, how often is this coming? Is it a factor? Are people preoccupied with this, or is it something that we can just kind of seal off and move on?
You're nodding your head on that, Kathleen?
Well, I think it is really important by checking with your own base how they feel about it, and with candidates and the door stop for sure. That's the most important. I agree with Bill that completely. But you also have to question, if these people are in fact, truly members, truly engaged in the party, when you go 30,000 feet, it's to the advantage of the rival party to make the other party look like there's internal fractures. In the case of John Turner in 1988 and what's happening now in Ontario in 2014, I think that there are people in all parties, I would suggest, that often take out memberships just to then later rip them up very publicly to grab a few headlines. And I think that real committed supporters understand that and will still stand by their party. I think what's interesting in this case, it's not a leadership question that's being raised. It's a question of how progressive is one's policies, one party's policies. So I think it's easy to examine.
And just to pick up on that, I think if these people really wanted to affect an outcome, they would have released this letter after the budget was introduced and before Ms. Horvath had announced her party's position. There was a time there for engagement. There was a time there to make representation. There was a time for a response. I think the timing of this thing, if you go to the backstretch of any racetrack anywhere in the world, they'll say to you, coincidences happen, but the smart money never bets on them.
Well, I'm kind of surprised to hear that Jerry Kaplan's an instant New Democrat.
Now, David. Clause in. Okay, change of topic. I want to deal with riding nominations, and I'm looking specifically now at federal ones. Look at this graphic, because it gives you a good indication of where we are 17 months away from an election date. October of 2015. The Conservatives have nominated, it's estimated this figure, over 100 ridings already. The Liberals, they say they've nominated in 37, the NDP in only 2, the Green Party in none. Now, I find that interesting, but I'm not quite sure what it means in terms of, it sounds like, well, they're more ready for an election than anybody else. Is that the case, or is there a reason we could be looking at these kind of numbers, David?
I don't think I would read anything into those numbers, particularly about election readiness at this stage, because parties have different processes. I don't even know if the NDP have opened up their nomination process yet and allowed those things to go ahead. I know the Liberal Party has only recently started to nominate people. And parties with a lot of incumbents generally are ahead in these kind of nominated candidates things. But in general, I think nominations are indicative. They're indicative of the enthusiasm out there. They're indicative of how many people actually want to run, because normally if there's a lot of people that want to run, that's when the riding starts pushing to have a nomination meeting, and so the central party schedules a nomination meeting to go ahead. So, it's indicative of what's happening on the ground. Are you out there turning over every rock to find candidates, or are there ridings that are anxious to have a meeting because they've got so many candidates? But at this early stage, probably doesn't mean that much.
On the face of it, it would seem that it's a good thing if you've got a lot of them. I hear what you're saying. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, but on the face of it, looks good, I suppose, for a party to be way ahead in that. But is there a downside, Kathleen, to having so many people nominated so early?
Yes, I think there are. I mean, the benefits are clear: name recognition, increased profile, ability to fundraise. But the drawbacks are, we're still somewhere between 15 months out from the next election, a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on when you believe the election will actually happen in 2015. And by electing your candidates now, you're preventing future candidates who may become more interested in your party or interested in running for electoral office closer to the election date. There are cases where star candidates are often courted for years. Romeo Saganash is an example of that. He is an MP from northern Quebec. He was courted since 2004 over many years and many different election cycles. He finally became the candidate only just before the 2011 election. If we had locked in our candidates 18 months prior to that election, we wouldn't have gotten such a stellar candidate to run for us. So, and also there is also the obvious problem or drawback you might mention, is that as soon as a candidate is elected, or nominated, I should say, excuse me, they therefore are branded to the party, and then any kind of quote-unquote bozo eruption that they do in those 18 months, now is worn by the party, and opposition researchers have a longer time to research into their backgrounds.
And all parties have suffered from that kind of a situation in the past. Bill, where are you on this?
I think it's of value as part of a broader narrative, and that broader narrative, the Commissioner of Official Languages in Canada, Graham Fraser, who was a distinguished political journalist before that, coined a phrase that it was called the campaign correlative. And the notion is it's sort of campaign as metaphor for your ability to run the country. And it's a kind of a journalistic shorthand. If you're seeing that you can't run campaigns, you're probably not ready to govern. And so I think that the nomination process, whether it's numbers or whether there's problems around nominations, are part of that broader narrative about competence, about organization, about discipline, about skill, you know, you need to manage that, and you need to manage it well, or you're going to spend a lot of time answering questions about people and/or specific policies that you just as soon not be talking about.
All right, we're out of time, but Kathleen did tease us with a good subject matter, which we'll save for the next time round, which is the whole issue of fixed date elections, because it is a fixed date, supposedly by law, October of 2015 for the next federal, but how fixed is fixed? There could be some adjustment in that. We'll talk about it next time. Thank you all, and thank you, Bill, for filling in this week.